moment the flagpole snapped to ground, the hush across the cul-de-sac was deafening. Neighbors froze mid-conversations, children paused in play, and even birds seemed to hold their breath. That fluttering symbol, stars and stripes, had been a fixture in the yard of 2214 Maple Ridge Drive for 20 years. Now it lay crumpled on the lawn, the banner soaked with dew and smudged by the turf. The law claimed the homeowners association had the right to demand its removal, but the outcome of that judicial battle would shock everyone involved and change how power, property rights, and community control colluded in silence. Maple Ridge was a kind of suburban enclave people mentioned with pride. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, trim hedges, and early evening strolls. Nestled on the outskirts of mid-sized Rust Belt city, let's call it Fairview, Ohio, it had been developed in the early 1990s. The houses were modest but well-built. Families mostly of middle income, many professionals working in the city or nearby manufacturing hubs. The community had a homeowners association, HOA, with binding covenants that every owner had to sign and abide by, rules about fencing, landscaping, exterior paint, even mailbox styles. Into that ordered tapestry moved the Harrison family in January of 2004. Sarah and Daniel Harrison had bought number 2214. Sarah taught at a local high school. Daniel was a structural engineer at a nearby firm. Their two children, Emma, then age 8, and Jacob, age 5, soon joined them. They were quiet, respectful people. Daniel loved working in his garage, designing little model bridges in spare time. Sarah gardened. The kids played with neighbors. Over time, the Harrisons became reasonably known, though not especially outgoing. Friends with a handful, but respectful of privacy. From the start, Sarah and Daniel displayed a certain reverence for tradition. Daniel's grandfather had served in the Army, and the family kept a small collection of mementos, including a neatly folded American flag, ceremonially presented on Veterans Days. After moving in, Daniel quietly installed a flagpole in the front yard and flew a 3-by-5-foot American flag on national holidays, as well as Mother's Day and Veterans Day. It was never ostentatious. He kept the flag in perfect condition, replaced it when faded, lowered it at dusk, raised it at dawn. Neighbors barely noticed. Over the years, the Harrisons became stable fixtures. Their children grew older. Emma joined a debate club. Jacob liked soccer. Sarah got a promotion at the school. Daniel was known for helping neighbors with light construction. Their reputation was of reliability, of modest pride. And so when the HOA first raised a complaint about the flag, 12 years later, it felt like a ripple on smooth water, a tiny disturbance that nobody expected to become a storm. It came on a bright autumn morning in 2016. Daniel checked the mail, sort of the usual, a magazine, bills, a flyer for pest control. The last envelope bore no return address. Inside was a crisp letter on stationery from Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, Board of Directors. The tone was formal, almost polite. Dear Mr. Harrison, it has come to the attention of the board that you are flying a flag in your front yard in violation of Covenant Section 7.4. Please remove the flag and flagpole structure immediately. Failure to comply may incur fines and legal actions. Daniel's first thought was confusion. He retrieved the HOA bylaws, which he kept in a binder, and reread the relevant section. 7.4 pertained to exterior structures visible from the street, but the wording was ambiguous. Fences, sheds, satellite dishes, not explicitly flagpoles or flags. He had never received any prior notice. He called Sarah at school, telling her, "Someone from the HOA says we have to take down the flag. I'll call them tonight." At the next monthly HOA meeting, which homeowners were supposed to attend in person or via proxy, Sarah and Daniel appeared, wondering if this was an isolated enforcement or a new initiative. They were met with cool formality. Board President Veronica Cole explained, "We had several complaints from residents about visual uniformity. The flagpole, though small, breaks design consistency. Under Covenant 7.4, every structure must have advanced board approval, which yours did not." She refused to back down. The Harrisons requested copies of complaints, minutes of meetings, any precedent. The board presented none. They offered to allow decorative flags, seasonal or holiday-themed, mounted on facades, but not full pole flags. Sarah faintly recalled the neighbor a few blocks over had a decorative banner the year before, but the HOA leadership, they claimed, had quietly allowed that to expire. Daniel leaned back in his seat, masking frustration. He asked, "Is there any way we can come to an accommodation? We're willing to mount a flag on the house facade rather than a pole, as long as it's visible." The board demurred. "That still violates the uniform appearance guidelines. We must preserve architectural harmony." The Harrisons asked for a written appeal. They were told to draft a petition. In the weeks that followed, they gathered letters from neighbors in support, reminders of the flag's unobtrusiveness, mentions of the family's long-standing service. Daniel's grandfather, veteran. But the board rejected the appeal in its very next meeting, citing precedent risk. They set a compliance deadline, 30 days. If not removed, they threatened fines, liens, and legal enforcement. For a while, nothing dramatic happened. The Harrisons quietly debated whether to comply or resist. Sarah was torn. Her pride bristled at being forced to retreat, but she feared the legal costs. Daniel quietly researched free speech, flag laws, HOAs, and case law. They consulted a local attorney, who told them there was ambiguity in how flag display rights intersect with property covenants, especially if First Amendment arguments applied. But his fees were steep, and the HOA's budget for defense could dwarf theirs. Neighbors started whispering. Some were sympathetic. Mrs. Levin at 2208 told Sarah, "You've been flying that flag for years, and it never bothered anyone. Why now?" Others were more reserved. Mr. Clark, a newer homeowner, told a friend in private, "Uniformity means we avoid ugliness. If everybody does what they want, the street looks like a jumble." The HOA board began privately being lauded by a faction of residents for keeping standards high. One evening, a disturbing note was left on the Harrisons' doorstep. Crudely handwritten, not anonymous, but unsigned. "You'll regret pushing this. Some things are better left quiet." A neighbor, it shook Sarah. She urged Daniel to consider removing the flag temporarily, but Daniel balked. "If we do that, we give them victory." Still, he told her to be careful. At midnight 2 nights later, Emma awoke to footsteps near her window. She peeked. A distant figure crouched near the flagpole outside, silhouetted. Her heart pounded. She couldn't tell who it was. The figure lingered, then backed off into darkness. She whispered to Jacob, but by the time her parents came, she ran to wake them. The figure was gone, no sign left, except faint footprints in the dew. Daniel inspected the prints. They were boot treads of generic design, not distinctive. He felt fear and anger. Someone was surveilling their yard. Sarah worried for the kids. Their dispute with the HOA had escalated beyond paper. On a damp August evening in 2017, the Harrisons were away visiting Sarah's sister in another state. At 2:13 a.m., a neighbor security camera, facing the street, captured a small dark truck pulling into their driveway. The driver, clad in a hooded jacket, got out, moved swiftly. The footage, low resolution, showed the figure approach the flagpole, wheeled a crowbar, pry at the base, and yanked the pole free. The pole snapped, flags fluttering, and clattered to the pavement. The assailant hovered for a moment, then lifted one end and carried the pole toward the truck. The truck reversed slowly and drove off down the street. The camera recorded the plate partially, just the first and last characters. 3_X82_9. The middle digits were blurred. By sunrise, Sarah and Daniel received a call from a neighbor. "Your flagpole is down and lying on the lawn." They rushed home. The pole was bent, the foundation footing broken. The flag was shredded. More chilling. Inked across the corner of the foundation was painted the letters, 7-4 kept, a cryptic taunt referencing Covenant 7.4. They called the police. The local precinct assigned Detective Mar Griffin, a steady 12-year veteran, to the case. The insurance adjuster came. There was property damage, costly, but reparable. Still, the symbolic violation cut deeper. The Harrisons felt targeted. The HOA claimed no knowledge of wrongdoing and offered to replace the pole at partial cost, but demanded immediate compliance to remove any new flag display. Detective Griffin arrived at Maple Ridge, walked the cul-de-sac at dawn. Neighbors huddled behind curtains, curious. She cordoned off the lawn, dusted for prints, Found none useful. Collected the security camera footage from a neighbor, grainy but helpful. The preliminary investigation began. Clue number 1, the partial plate. The string 3_X82_9 was fed into DMV databases. Several vehicles in the county matched possible permutations. One was a gray Ford F-150 registered to a local contractor named Irving DeSouza, who lived 2 blocks away. His plates were 3EX829. The investigators obtained a warrant to check that truck. Irving said the truck had been stolen a few days before. He reported the theft to DD number 12 to 728. He claimed he was out of town at the time of the sabotage. His alibi. Family confirmed he dined at a restaurant 40 miles away. Surveillance from that restaurant showed his license plate. But camera footage had gaps. Clue number 2, paint traces and tool marks. Forensic teams found traces of the same white ink that was used to paint 7 to 4 kept on the foundation. The paint's binder was matched to a batch sold exclusively at a local hardware store, Fairview Hardware, under order #AZ114. Sales records showed a purchase of that exact batch, a small quantity, by an account under Maple Ridge Property Care LLC. That company was the HOA's contracted maintenance vendor. The plot thickened. The HOA itself or someone within likely had access to the paint. Clue number 3, security camera network. Several other nearby homes had cameras, though pointed away from the Harrison yard. But Detective Griffin reviewed footage at 3 a.m. from 4 cameras. 2 showed a dark sedan cruising slowly, lights off, passing Maple Ridge. One of those sedans matched ownership records of board president Veronica Cole. Veronica claimed her car had been under repair at that time. She produced repair invoices. But the time stamps had some discrepancies and were never fully validated. Clue number 4, altered minutes and missing records. Griffin requested copies of HOA meeting minutes around the time of flag controversies. The board provided documents, but an IT forensics specialist flagged metadata inconsistencies. Several minutes notes from June 2016 to December 2017 have been edited or re-exported after the fact. Some pages lack timestamps. It looked like records had been cleaned up. On cross-examination, Veronica claimed an outside consultant standardized older documents, that she had no knowledge of the edits. Suspects began to multiply. Among them, Veronica Cole, HOA president, had the motive, control, reputation, precedent. She denied involvement, but evidence pressure mounted. Irving DeSouza, contractor, a suspect due to plate match. He had a record of petty vandalism and had lobbied for HOA contracts. A disaffected homeowner. Mr. Brent Walters at 2220 was vocal in board meetings, opposing the Harrisons, who he claimed bragged about exemptions. Walters had no alibi for the night of sabotage. Another HOA board member, Sandra Miller, was quietly allied with Veronica, but rumors hinted at possible resentment toward the Harrisons' pushback. An inside maintenance worker, Jorge Ramos, employed by Maple Ridge Property Care LLC, had keys, had painted surfaces, and might have been covertly tasked. He had the technical know-how to break a base, remove the pole, avoid detection. Griffin interrogated each. She tried to trace communications, emails, texts, phone logs. The HOA's emails had deletions. The maintenance company claimed Jorge was on leave the week of the sabotage. Jorge denied being involved. DeSouza insisted his truck was stolen, but mechanic found fresh paint specks in his engine bay matching the same white paint. DeSouza later retracted, claiming someone else had used his truck without his knowledge. Meanwhile, residents whispered. Some backed the HOA as enforcing order. Some whisper corruption. Neighbor against neighbor. Fear spread. Anonymous flyers circulated. HOA equals Hidden Oppression Association. Tension mounted. Sarah and Daniel lived in near constant vigilance, often staying awake late, checking their yard at midnight, installing extra motion lights and a dummy camera. Through interviews and observations, Griffin constructed psychological profiles. Veronica Cole, she was image conscious. She viewed the HOA not merely as a community board, but as an arbiter of taste, consistency, and a public face for Maple Ridge. She believed peace required uniformity. She had been under pressure from new homeowners who wanted stricter enforcement. Yet she also feared legal challenges, litigation, and precedent. Her public persona was calm and rational. Privately, she admitted frustration that some people believe their property means they can do anything. In her own admission during a taped interview, she wished the Harrisons would just comply and stop making waves. Daniel and Sarah Harrison. They believed in fairness and precedent. Daniel felt violated. He had never been a political person, but he believed the flag was a rightful expression and that strongmen must be opposed. Sarah felt fear for her children, but also indignation that the HOA could reach into their personal yard. She oscillated between compliance and defiance, wrestling with whether to draw the battle further. Detective Griffin. She was methodical, unflappable, but haunted by unsolved domestic squabbles. She saw early that the case was more than vandalism. It was an assertion of power, a control over individuals disguised as regulation. She felt empathy for the Harrisons, but knew that HOAs had legal teeth. She worried that if she jumped to a suspect prematurely, she'd lose credibility. She quietly prepared for a long fight. Jorge Ramos, a quiet, soft-spoken worker. He had a familial obligation, low pay, and sometimes resented the homeowner's demands. Griffin interviewed him under promise of immunity. He seemed hesitant. His hands trembled. He admitted, "I sometimes did small favors for the board to replace things, repaint walls, adjust fences, but sabotage? No, that's beyond me." But his alibi was flimsy. He claimed to have been home sick that night. His roommate's statement changed under pressure. Irving DeSouza, he had a rough edge. He'd had disputes with neighbors, even arguments at meetings. His defense counsel claimed his plate match was coincidence. But the paint specks threatened to tie him to the scene. He began acting evasive. His phone log showed late-night messages with contact saved as V Board. He fumbled when defenders pressed him on that. Brent Walters, his motive was grudging envy. He complained about special accommodations, and the Harrisons had occasionally lobbied but were refused on other variances. Walters had no alibi. He claimed he slept at home, but no hard evidence backed that. His presence in public meetings had become strident. Still, no physical evidence tied him to the sabotage. Griffin's breakthrough came when she subpoenaed communications between the HOA board and Maple Ridge Property Care LLC. She discovered a chain of emails where Jorge Ramos was asked to rectify the poll issue without visible trace and revisit 7.4 compliance. The sender's address masked itself as a generic HOA alias, but further metadata traced to an IP address assigned to the HOA office computer used by board member Sandra Miller. When confronted, Sandra denied authoring the email, claiming the system was compromised. But forensic logs showed she was logged in at that time on that machine. She panicked. Veronica arched her eyebrows in feigned surprise. Sandra resigned from the board amid allegations. A twist. Sandra claimed she acted on her own, without Veronica's knowledge. She said she was frustrated at what she believed was favoritism toward the Harrisons and overreach. She insisted she acted secretly, sabotaging the poll to force a legal showdown that would clarify rights in the HOA. She gave a taped confession under plea deal that she pilfered Jorge's schedule, borrowed his tools, entered their yard at night, painted a 7 to 4 kept joke to frame HOA authority. She used Jorge's key copies and returned them. She claimed she'd anticipated the HOA board would support her after the fact, but Veronica and others distanced themselves. But the plot thickened further. When Griffin obtained financials from the HOA, she found that liability insurance policies had an exclusion for acts incident to enforcement, and there was an indemnity clause that would shield board members. In short, the board risked nothing. It appeared plausible that someone high up felt safe to push the boundary. Yet another twist. The log of phone calls between Sandra and Irving DeSouza revealed several midnight calls days before the sabotage. They claimed they were discussing landscaping work, but the timing struck Griffin as suspicious. If Sandra had orchestrated it, why consult DeSouza? Perhaps to borrow his truck? Indeed, DeSouza later admitted the truck was used that night. He claimed he lent it without knowledge of the purpose, after midnight messages from Sandra to pick up something and bring it to Maple Ridge. Under immunity, Sandra asserted that DeSouza had provided the vehicle, not her. So the developing case was Sandra Miller, acting alone but with logistical support from DeSouza, had sabotaged the Harrisons' flagpole to provoke compliance or a lawsuit, believing she was championing HOA authority. Veronica claimed she had no knowledge. The maintenance company claimed no involvement beyond mundane tasks. But impurities remained. Some board members, in secret, shifted votes to back Veronica. The association's lawyers drafted a settlement that insisted on the Harrisons removing the pole immediately in exchange for settling fines, not acknowledging fault. Sarah and Daniel balked. They wanted a full court decision. Armed with the investigation, the Harrisons filed suit against the HOA, naming the board, Sandra, DeSouza, and the maintenance company. The complaint alleged property damage, intentional trespass, conspiracy, and violation of free speech and property rights. It went to trial in fall 2018. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, local media, lawyers. The Harrison side argued that the HOA's enforcement was arbitrary and that the sabotage was a criminal act authorized, or at least accepted, by row board actors. The HOA's lawyers maintained they had no knowledge, no authorization, and that the damage was an isolated criminal act, not their policy. Sandra took the stand. Her admission was a crux. She testified she acted on her own, without board direction. Under cross-examination, she insisted she never told Veronica or other board members. She claimed DeSouza lent his truck reluctantly. She said she expected to face consequences, but believed the cause was just. Irving DeSouza declined to testify against Sandra, citing Fifth Amendment privileges or state equivalent. The defense argued lack of direct proof tying Sandra's plan to the sabotage, and claimed the painting taunt could have been done by someone else. Veronica testified she had no foreknowledge and had not edited minutes deliberately. She apologized for procedural confusion but denied malfeasance. Detective Griffin and the lead prosecutor presented the chain of communication, the forensic logs, the metadata, the paint links, and the phone logs. They portrayed Sandra as the instigator, DeSouza as a logistics agent, the HOA board as negligent but not conspiratorial. The defense argued reasonable doubt. No witness directly saw Sandra in the act. The truck plate match was circumstantial. HOA board as a corporate entity should not be liable for individual wrongdoing. But a surprise twist arrived mid-trial. A new witness, an anonymous neighbor who had shied from public view, came forward with signed affidavit. They claimed to have seen, about 50 minutes before the sabotage, a hooded figure entering the Harrison driveway, holding a crowbar. They recognized the gate as belonging to board member Veronica Cole, a rare personal detail, since Veronica had a limp from a past injury. The video footage lacked clarity, but this witness insisted they'd seen the limp and traced Veronica's walk. The defense moved to dismiss that testimony as unreliable. The judge allowed it with caution regarding credibility. That testimony raised doubt. Had Veronica herself orchestrated or participated? Maybe Sandra was not alone. Defense lawyers hinted at plausible conspiracy. Veronica's protestations sounded more defensive than innocent. In closing arguments, the Harrisons' counsel pressed that Sandra's confession, communications logs, and physical evidence matched. The HOA board should be held vicariously liable under theories of agency, negligent supervision, and that the board had implicitly condoned aggressive enforcement. The defense repeated the refrain. No proof beyond reasonable doubt that the HOA board knew or approved. This was a rogue act. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The courtroom waited, tense. When they returned, the foreperson stood. Sandra Miller was found guilty on civil counts: trespass, conspiracy, and intentional property damage. She was ordered to pay restitution to the Harrisons. The HOA board was found liable for negligent supervision and must pay part damages, though insurers balked. The forced removal command from the HOA was deemed unenforceable under specific circumstances. It was overly broad, impinging on expressive rights in a way beyond the board's covenant powers. The verdict was widely reported. HOA must pay family and cannot ban flag under these conditions. The local news ran, "Small town fight ends in landmark decision." Veronica Cole resigned. The board was reconstituted. The Harrisons, emotionally exhausted, removed their legal flag. Temporarily, they refurbished the lawn, replaced the broken flagpole on their terms. They got damages. but the fight had left scars. In the weeks following the verdict, Maple Ridge simmered. Some residents felt vindicated. Maybe HOA rules went too far. Others bristled at the loss of order. The new board drafted new, narrower rules, allowing flag display under certain standards, requiring approval, but forbidding large, permanent, pole-mounted displays visible from street unless pre-approved. The Harrisons, cautious now, petitioned to reinstall a modest flagpole under new guidelines. The board approved. On Memorial Day 2019, the 3x5 flag flew again. Neighbors paused. Some clapped. Some averted their eyes. Yet tension lingered beneath polite facades. Veronica moved away. Sandra paid her restitution in installments. Her reputation tarnished. De Souza's business declined. Detective Griffin moved on to other cases, but kept Maple Ridge in her files. But all was not settled. Months later, Sarah received an email from an untraceable address. Subject: "You won't be safe now." Inside a single line, this was just the beginning. At night, Emma woke from a recurring dream. A shadow in the yard, a flag flapping, a whisper. 7-4 kept. Jacob silently told Daniel. He thought someone was watching the window again. David Harrison, the cousin of Daniel, a technology consultant, ran a check. Someone had hacked into their home Wi-Fi for separate times, dates aligning with anniversary dates of the flag's removal demand. No sign of intrusion into bank accounts, but just enough to rattle nerves. Detective Griffin reopened a cold file in her mind. That limp witness, the email, the hack attempts, all pointed to deeper collusion. Was Sandra truly alone? Or were there hidden backers pulling strings from the shadows? The court case resolved the overt sabotage and enforcement issue, but left questions. Who had the most to gain from silencing the Harrisons? Why the escalations now, after 12 years of peaceful coexistence? Did someone behind the scenes view the flag not as expression, but as threat of precedent of defiance? Maple Ridge would never return to quiet normalcy. In the quiet nights, the wind through leaves, a ripple of the flag, a fleeting shadow. It all whispered that the fight wasn't over. The gavel's echo had barely faded when Maple Ridge pretended to breathe again. The court's verdict had come and gone. The flags once more were allowed to fly, and the newspapers had moved on to fresher scandals. But inside the quiet symmetry of that Ohio suburb, something unspoken pulsed beneath the lawns and lilac bushes. Neighbors smiled, waved, baked pies for block parties. Yet behind closed curtains, phones buzzed with whispers. The Harrisons cost us thousands. Sandra wasn't the only one. There are names missing from a file. At 2214 Maple Ridge Drive, Daniel Harrison stood on his porch one misty dawn, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the flag dance in the breeze. The repairs were done, the poles stronger than before, anchored with reinforced concrete. The court had ordered restitution. But for Daniel, the true victory was defiance. He'd stood up for something larger than himself. Yet he couldn't shake the sense that the neighborhood had changed. Too quiet, too watchful. He didn't yet know that the next battle, the one that would break the illusion of order forever, was already taking shape, just a few houses away. It began subtly. 3 weeks after the verdict, Sarah found their mailbox pried open. Inside, a folded scrap of paper, plain, no signature. You made the wrong enemies. She tried to laugh it off at first, showing Daniel over dinner. Probably just one of those HOA weirdos venting. But Daniel noticed her trembling hands. He slipped the note into a drawer, promising to tell Detective Griffin if anything else happened. Days later, a late-night thump shook the quiet. Emma, now 17, peeked from her window and saw a dark SUV idling across the street. The headlights flickered twice, then off. When she blinked, it was gone. Daniel called the police. A patrol car drove by. Found nothing. Could be teens, the officer said. Still, we'll make a note. The next morning, their Wi-Fi router was dead. The ISP technician said it wasn't a simple outage. Someone spoofed your access credentials. This wasn't random. Daniel's cousin, David, the IT consultant, came over that night. He dug into the logs and paled. Dan, this wasn't just snooping. Whoever did this cloned your home network. Try to access the security camera feed. They were watching you. Sarah stood still. Watching us? For what? David's answer was quiet. For control. Detective Mara Griffin had transferred to the city's Organized Property Crimes Division after Maple Ridge's first scandal. She thought she'd left suburb politics behind. Then she received a file in her inbox. Anonymous source. Timestamp 2:47 a.m. The subject line read, "You miss one." Attached were internal HOA documents, unredacted emails between board members that never appeared in discovery. One in particular caught her eye. A message from 2017 titled Urgent Enforcement. Case Harrison, sent by someone using the alias v.consult. It contained chilling language. If the flag remains after notice, take administrative corrective action. Cleanup authorized. That phrase, cleanup authorized, was identical to wording Sandra Miller used during her confession. But this email predated Sandra's supposed independent act by 3 weeks. Griffin dug deeper. The message originated from a private domain registered under Cole's Strategic Holdings, Veronica Cole's property company, the woman who'd sworn under oath that she had nothing to do with the sabotage. Griffin felt her pulse quicken. Had the former HOA president lied under oath? And if so, who else had shielded her? The next morning, Griffin filed a request to reopen the case. But 2 days later, her superior called her in. "Drop it," he said flatly. "It's closed. No jurisdiction left." She argued, citing the new evidence. He cut her off. "Mara, the county DA's office doesn't want another suburban media circus. Let it go." That night, her car tires were slashed in her own driveway. No theft, no vandalism, just a warning. Maple Ridge fractured in slow motion. A faction of residents, self-dubbed the preservationists, began circulating flyers accusing the Harrisons of weaponizing patriotism for personal gain. They claimed property values had dropped because of unwanted attention. Another group, the Free Home Coalition, defended the Harrisons and called for disbanding the HOA entirely. Meetings turned hostile. Fists slammed tables. The police were called twice. In one meeting, old Mr. Whitby stood up and shouted, "That family fought for everyone's rights here. You people act like they're criminals." Someone from the back yelled, "They are criminals. They cost us our insurance coverage." Within weeks, signs appeared in yards. "Keep order in Maple Ridge" on one side of the street. "Freedom lives here" on the other. By July, Daniel and Sarah noticed their garbage bins overturned twice a week. The kids' bikes mysteriously scratched. Sarah's car keyed. Emma's phone began receiving blank text messages from unknown numbers, each with timestamps matching the nights the flag had been vandalized years earlier. 2:13 a.m. On the night of September 18th, 2019, at 2:07 a.m., a spark lit the edge of the Harrisons' lawn. Security footage later showed a figure crouched near the base of the flagpole, holding a small container. The figure poured fluid gasoline and struck a match. The flame caught, racing up the pole. The camera caught only a silhouette, slender frame, wearing a hooded jacket, gloved hands. The flag ignited instantly, flames licking the night sky. Sarah's scream pierced the dark as Daniel rushed out with the extinguisher. He doused the flames, coughing, as the pole toppled. The damage was confined to the front yard, but the symbolism was unmistakable. Another warning. Detective Griffin arrived at dawn, uninvited but unable to stay away. She scanned the ashes, knelt beside the charred pole, and whispered, "They're back." Fire investigators found traces of accelerant consistent with a commercial cleaning solvent, not standard gasoline. The brand? One used by Maple Ridge's old property contractor, Property Care LLC. Griffin's got twisted. The same signature, years later. David Harrison's tech instincts took over. He pulled every byte from the burned security camera's backup. Amid corrupted data, he found one intact fragment, 3 seconds long. A vehicle's headlights illuminated the vandal just before the flames flared. A fleeting reflection revealed a silver watch glinting beneath the sleeve, the same kind Veronica Cole wore in her deposition photographs. David hesitated before showing Daniel and Sarah. He worried it would push them over the edge. But truth mattered more than comfort. When Daniel saw the clip, he sat in silence for a full minute, staring. Then he said quietly, "We take this to Mara." They met Griffin in a diner outside town. The detective watched the footage 3 times, then leaned back. "If this is real, Veronica's not done. She's escalating." Sarah's voice broke. "Why? What does she want from us?" Griffin said, "It's not about you anymore. It's about control. The HOA was her empire. You humiliated her in court. Now she's reclaiming her power through fear." Over the next month, Griffin worked off the record. She interviewed ex-contractors, former board members, and one of Veronica's assistants. What emerged was a pattern of covert intimidation stretching years back. Quiet threats against homeowners who challenged board authority. The assistant confessed that Veronica had created a network of compliance watchers. Neighbors paid under the table to report violations. They had WhatsApp groups named innocently as Community Watch. But inside were photos of homeowners' yards, fences, and, more chillingly, children playing outside. The goal wasn't safety. It was control through surveillance. Among the chat logs Griffin retrieved was one titled Case Red Stripe. The pinned message read, "The flag stays down or we go to phase 2. The timestamp? The same week the Harrisons' first flagpole was destroyed. When Griffin and the Harrisons presented the evidence to the state prosecutor, the new district attorney agreed to reopen the case under RICO statutes, organizing conspiracy through intimidation and sabotage. A warrant was issued for Veronica Cole's arrest. News spread fast. But the night before she was to be taken in, Veronica vanished. Her phone last pinged near a rest stop on Interstate 77. Her silver Lexus was found abandoned 2 days later. Doors unlocked, keys in the ignition. No sign of struggle. Inside the glove compartment was a folded copy of the Fairview Gazette headline from the previous year. HOA president found liable in flag case. Scrawled across it in red pen, "This isn't finished." By winter, Maple Ridge no longer resembled the idyllic suburb it once was. Houses went up for sale. Property values plummeted. The HOA, stripped of leadership, collapsed. The county placed it under administrative receivership, but the fear didn't dissolve. It spread. Sarah started hearing knocks at the door at 3 a.m. with no one outside. Emma's phone rang nightly from block numbers. Jacob, now older, claimed to see someone standing by the mailbox at dusk, watching. Daniel tried to dismiss it all. Stress, paranoia. But one morning, he found a small black USB stick left on the hood of his car. Inside, hundreds of photos, taken from various yards across Maple Ridge. Many showed their house, the flagpole, and a timestamp overlay. Live monitor. HOA compliance 2017 to 2019. Someone had been watching continuously. David analyzed the metadata. The files were uploaded to a remote cloud drive registered under a corporate name that made Sarah's blood run cold. Cole Strategic Holdings, Veronica's defunct company. She was gone, but her network was not. March 2020. 1 year after the verdict, Detective Griffin received a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice, trembling, whispered, "You're looking in the wrong place." It wasn't just Veronica. Before Griffin could ask who it was, the line went dead. She traced the call to an address in nearby Franklin County, a property owned by Cole Strategic Holdings. A warehouse. She went there that night, alone. The building was abandoned, dust thick, lights flickering. But at the back, under a tarp, she found something chilling. Dozens of boxes labeled HOA archives. Inside were files on every homeowner. Photographs, payment histories, even police records. And in one folder, stamped confidential, Phase 3, a name written in bold marker, Harrison. Beneath it, blueprints of the Harrison home, highlighted points on windows, doorways, and flagpole foundation. Handwritten in red ink, final demonstration to reassert compliance. Griffin snapped photos, heart pounding. As she turned to leave, she noticed movement near the door. Shadows, faint footsteps. Someone else was inside. Authorities raided the warehouse 2 days later. Dozens of files were confiscated. The press called it the Maple Ridge surveillance scandal. Griffin's photos exposed systemic privacy violations by the HOA's upper circle, illegal surveillance, data collection, intimidation. But still, Veronica Cole remained missing. Then, in an astonishing twist, a whistleblower from within the preservationist faction came forward. She revealed that after Veronica's resignation, several wealthy residents had funded a private security initiative to monitor the Harrisons' compliance post-trial. It was never disbanded. They claimed it was for neighborhood safety. The whistleblower added one more name, someone Griffin didn't expect. Walt Benson, the county records clerk who testified years earlier as a neutral witness. He had helped authorize the secret surveillance under false permits. The conspiracy reached beyond Maple Ridge. April 12, 2020. Sarah was in the kitchen when she heard Daniel's phone buzz. He frowned. Unknown number, local area code. He answered. A woman's voice. Calm, deliberate. Mr. Harrison, this is a courtesy call. I hope you're enjoying your freedom, but you shouldn't have reopened old wounds. Daniel froze. Who is this? Someone who remembers when neighbors knew their place. The call ended. He checked the call log. It was wiped before his eyes. That night, their security cameras stopped working again. When Daniel went outside to reset the system, he found something buried halfway in the dirt by the mailbox. A small tin box wrapped in electrical tape. Inside, a charred fragment cloth, red and white stripes. Their flag, Detective Griffin, arranged protective surveillance for the Harrisons. But the department's resources were stretched thin. Pandemic protocols limited in-person patrols. Then one night in May, everything unraveled. Emma, studying late, saw through her window a figure standing motionless by the sidewalk, hooded, silver glint at the wrist. She screamed for her father. Daniel rushed out, flashlight in hand. The figure turned, sprinted toward the cul-de-sac exit, disappearing into darkness. Police arrived minutes later, found footprints. Same tread pattern as years before. Same boots, Griffin whispered. Same ghost. In June, Griffin received another anonymous envelope at her precinct desk. Inside, a USB drive labeled Final Compliance. It contained video clips, dozens, from hidden cameras inside Maple Ridge homes. The last video, time-stamped 1 week earlier, showed the Harrisons' living room, the family on their couch. Unaware, someone was watching from inside. The footage panned toward the window, where, faintly reflecting the glass, stood a figure outside. The reflection was unmistakable. Veronica Cole's face, older, hollow-eyed, staring directly at the camera. But she was supposed to be gone. Griffin dropped the drive and whispered, "She's back." The Harrisons began preparing to move. They listed their home quietly, ready to leave Maple Ridge forever. But days before the sale closed, a certified envelope arrived at their door, stamped with an old HOA seal. Inside was a single-typed letter. Compliance inspection scheduled for June 29th. Attendance mandatory. There was no HOA anymore, no reason such a letter should exist. Yet the signature at the bottom read, Veronica Cole, President, reinstated. Daniel's heart pounded. Sarah said, "It's a hoax." But the next morning, orange survey flags appeared across their lawn. When Daniel pulled one from the dirt, he saw something written on the stake in marker. 7 to 4 kept. June 29, 2020. At precisely midnight, all power in the Harrison home cut out. The streetlights flickered, then died. Sarah lit a candle. Daniel checked the breaker. Fine. David's phone pinged an alert. All network feeds offline. Cameras disabled. Then a knock. Slow. Deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Emma whispered, "Dad, they're here again." Daniel grabbed a flashlight. Stepped toward the door. Sarah clutched his arm. "Don't." He hesitated. Then the doorknob turned from the outside. The door creaked open. Wind swept through the hall. And there, standing on the porch, illuminated by the weak flicker of candlelight, was a figure in a gray coat, face shadowed, silver watch gleaming. "Good evening," the figure said softly. "It's time for your final inspection." Daniel froze. "Veronica?" The figure smiled faintly. "You really thought I was gone?" Behind her, headlights flared, multiple vehicles blocking the street. Figures emerged, dressed in dark jackets marked compliance team. Sarah screamed. Then, from the darkness behind Veronica, another voice, cold, unfamiliar, male, spoke. We told you the flag was only the beginning. The courtroom was quieter than it had been in months. No cameras. No reporters shouting for quotes. Just a creak of benches. The faint hum of ceiling fans, and the slow shuffle of the bailiff adjusting papers. Outside, the world had moved on, or at least it seemed to, but for the Harrisons, everything in their lives had come to a still, trembling halt. It had been 112 days since the verdict. The Homeowners Association of Magnolia Crest had been ordered to pay damages for emotional distress and legal costs, a total of $210,000. More importantly, the judge's ruling declared the HOA's covenant banning unsanctioned displays unconstitutional under state and federal free speech protections. For a moment, when the gavel struck that final time, Evelyn Harrison thought it was over. But nothing about this story was ever that simple. Magnolia Crest looked different now. Some houses still had their flags, red, white, and blue, fluttering proudly in the Oregon breeze. Others kept their yards bare, afraid of drawing new conflict. The once perfect lawns now showed signs of disunity. Fences newly painted in protest colors, driveways with spray-painted slogans like "Freedom is negotiable" or "Rules are rules." The HOA board resigned in fragments. Patricia Whitmore, the iron-willed president, had vanished from public view after the trial. Her husband, Richard, was said to have transferred property holdings out of state. Rumors swirled that she'd been diagnosed with heart problems, that she fled Arizona, or that she was quietly preparing an appeal with a new legal team. But beneath the surface, something else was stirring. Evelyn began receiving letters, at first from strangers across the country, thanking her for standing her ground. Veterans, teachers, single parents, even a retired police chief from Ohio, all writing about how they, too, had been silenced by HOA power. Yet, not every envelope carried praise. Some came with no return address. Some with crude threats scrawled in red marker. You destroyed our community. We know where you live. You'll regret that flag. At first, she shrugged it off until the night of March 17th. It was just past 2 a.m. when Evelyn heard the noise. A faint metallic click, followed by the whisper of movement near the back door. She froze in her bed, heart drumming like a warning bell. The house was dark. Her husband, Tom, was working a night shift at the distribution center. Their teenage son, Caleb, was asleep across the hall. Then, glass shattered. Evelyn stumbled from her bed, clutching her phone. "Caleb," she hissed, trying to keep her voice low. "Call 911 now." By the time the police arrived, the intruder was gone. But the damage was clear. The flagpole outside had been cut cleanly at its base. The American flag lay torn and muddy in the grass. The officers found boot prints in a flower bed, matching a size 11 work boot. No fingerprints. No cameras caught the intruder's face. When Officer Derek Sanders, the same one who testified in the court case, came by the next morning, he didn't hide his concern. "You poked a hornet's nest, Evelyn. Some people can't stand losing power, especially when the loss is public." She nodded, her eyes burning. "They can take my flag again if they want, but I'm not backing down." 3 weeks later, the HOA held an emergency meeting in the Magnolia Crest clubhouse, a sterile building with glass doors and fluorescent lights that hummed like nervous energy. Evelyn wasn't invited, but she went anyway. When she walked in, every conversation died. Neighbors she'd known for years, the Mathesons, the Brooks, the Garzas, all stared at her like she was a trespasser in her own neighborhood. Then she saw her, Patricia Whitmore. Platinum hair pulled tight, icy blue eyes glinting beneath the overhead lights. She looked thinner, paler, but her voice was as sharp as ever. "I am still the elected president of Magnolia Crest," Patricia declared, her tone brittle with control. "The court's ruling was an overreach. We are appealing, and effective immediately, all flag displays will remain suspended pending further notice." Gasps rippled through the room. Evelyn's hands trembled. "You can't do that." The judge's decision was final. Patricia turned, lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's what you think, Mrs. Harrison." She placed a folder on the table. Inside, a copy of a new lawsuit. This time, Patricia Whitmore versus Evelyn Harrison, claiming defamation, property value damage, and intentional emotional harm. Evelyn's stomach dropped. The war wasn't over. It had just changed form. Within days, the local news picked up the story again. Reporters camped outside Magnolia Crest. Microphones extended over hedges. Drones buzzing overhead. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag flag freedom. Hashtag get your revenge. Hashtag stand with Evelyn. Talk shows debated the case. Some painting Evelyn as a hero of free expression. Others calling her reckless for provoking instability in a structured community. The truth was more complicated. Evelyn's marriage began to strain under the pressure. Tom was exhausted, paranoid, worried for their son's safety. Caleb withdrew, skipping school, staying locked in his room, headphones on to drown out the noise. At night, Evelyn sat in the kitchen, staring at that flag, the same one she carefully cleaned after the break-in. Its colors had faded slightly, but it felt heavier now, like every thread carried the weight of what they had lost. During discovery for Patricia's new lawsuit, Evelyn's attorney, Rachel and Gwynn, the same relentless lawyer who had crushed the HOA case, found something strange. Emails, hundreds of them, between Patricia and a private consulting firm called Whitmore Property Compliance, LLC. The firm wasn't officially connected to Magnolia Crest, but it had been paid from HOA funds. The emails detailed plans to enforce stricter image regulations, including flag removal campaigns across multiple neighborhoods in the county. One message caught Rachel's attention. It was dated just 2 days before the original altercation over Evelyn's flag. Subject: pilot enforcement begins at Harrison residence. Maintain pressure until compliance. RW. The initials RW could only belong to Richard Whitmore. But when Rachel subpoenaed the firm's internal records, she hit a wall. The files had been wiped. Servers accidentally reformatted. Only one archive backup remained. Found by a whistleblower, a former IT employee who claimed he'd been told to delete everything. And in that backup, there was a name Evelyn had never seen before: Edward Sloan, the auditor. Edward Sloan wasn't just any corporate consultant. He was a quiet power behind several high-profile HOA management takeovers. His firm specialized in community restructuring, code for finding loopholes that allowed HOAs to seize control of property under the guise of non-compliance. He had ties to development companies, law firms, and even political donors. When Rachel brought his name to the DA's office, they reopened parts of the original HOA investigation, and what they found was staggering. Patricia and Richard Whitmore had been channeling HOA dues, hundreds of thousands of dollars, into contracts with Sloan's company. The flag removals weren't about aesthetics or policy. They were about testing homeowner resistance for future redevelopment. If people like Evelyn gave in quietly, it set a legal precedent for visual standard enforcement. If they didn't, their cases could be used to shape stricter laws for other neighborhoods. Evelyn wasn't just a target. She was a test subject. It all came to a head one humid June evening. Rachel arranged a meeting with Patricia's legal team to discuss settlement options. Evelyn insisted on attending. Patricia arrived flanked by her husband and a man in a charcoal suit. Silver hair, unreadable gray eyes. Edward Sloan. He greeted Evelyn with a faint smile. "Mrs. Harrison, you've been quite the disruptor." Evelyn glared. "You mean a person who refused to be bullied?" Sloan's smile never faded. "Bullying implies personal malice. I prefer to think of it as system calibration." Patricia spoke then, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "You think you've won, but you've endangered every homeowner in Magnolia Crest. Property values have dropped, investors are leaving, and people are moving out because of you." Evelyn slammed her hands on the table. "Because of me, or because of the corruption you try to hide?" For the first time, Patricia's composure cracked. She looked at Sloan, her lips twitching. He said it would be simple. Sloan's gaze darkened. "Careful, Patricia." The tension was electric. Rachel leaned forward. "We have your emails, Sloan. The payments, the directives. It's over. He stood slowly, gathering his briefcase. Then you better hope your flag keeps you safe. He walked out, leaving a silence thick enough to choke on. 2 nights later, flames lit up the sky over Magnolia Crest. The clubhouse was burning, a roaring inferno visible for miles. By dawn, it was nothing but blackened rubble. The fire marshal's report listed the cause as suspicious accelerant. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no security footage. Among the ashes, investigators found charred fragments of paper, HOA records, financial documents, and meeting notes. Almost everything that could prove Sloan's involvement was gone. Almost. In a twisted stroke of irony, the only surviving item was a melted piece of brass, the small plaque that once read, "Community integrity above all." Months passed. Patricia withdrew her lawsuit, citing health reasons. Her husband left town soon after. Edward Sloan disappeared from public records entirely. No business filings, no address, nothing. Rachel submitted her findings to state regulators, who quietly launched an inquiry into HOA corruption networks. But investigations like these move slowly. Too slowly for families like the Harrisons, who had already paid the emotional price. Life crept back toward normal. The grass grew again. The neighbors waved again, tentatively. And one morning, Evelyn walked outside and saw something she hadn't expected. Flags. Not just hers. Every house on her street had one. American flags, state flags, even a few hand-painted ones by children. It wasn't rebellion. It was solidarity. A statement. We won't be silenced again. Months later, Evelyn was invited to speak at a local community conference about homeowner rights. She stood behind a podium, her voice clear but steady. When you sign those HOA papers, she said, you think you're joining a community. What you don't realize is that you might also be surrendering your voice. Freedom isn't loud until someone tries to quiet it. The room was silent. She continued, our flag wasn't about politics. It wasn't about defiance. It was about the right to exist, to remember who we are in the places we call home. And that's something no rule book, no fine, and no threat should ever take away. Applause filled the hall. But in the back, a man in a gray suit stood silently, watching. His silver hair gleamed under the lights before he slipped through the door unnoticed. Edward Sloan. That night, Evelyn returned home to find a letter taped to her mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The court ruled on your flag, Mrs. Harrison. But freedom always comes with a cost. Let's see how far you're willing to pay it. No signature. No return address. Only one chilling line at the bottom, handwritten in ink that bled slightly across the paper. Partnership renewal, phase 2. Evelyn stared at the words for a long time before folding the note and setting it beside her flag on the table. She whispered, not again. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Some battles end with verdicts. Others begin with them. And in Magnolia Crest, beneath its painted fences and manicured lawns, a new war for control was already brewing. The story of the Harrison family is not just about a flag. It's about how power hides behind paperwork, and how silence can be enforced through fear. Yet, it's also about courage, the kind that refuses to yield even when the odds are rigged. Freedom often starts at home. It's in the small things we refuse to surrender. A voice, a belief, a symbol. Because once you give that up, they take everything else. If standing up for your rights meant risking everything you love, your peace, your home, your safety, would you still raise your flag?